Good afternoon. My name's John Enoch, and I lead what we call cloud economics in EMEA for AWS. And that's, I would say, a mixture of financial modeling and analysis, but quite a lot of commercial stakeholder management and looking at how people make decisions to get the outcomes that they want, rather than ones that they have to deal with. And just so that you're all very clear, this is not going to be a technical session. There are many of those today. This is very much looking at cloud adoption from a perspective of cost and risk and what the factors are that are going to help you get success rather than failure, just like with any other IT project. So, over the next 40 minutes, this is what you can expect in your life. We're going to cover three areas. First area, why is it that IT projects statistically fail? If you're going to do a big IT project, you would have better odds in Vegas. The Standish Group, who published the annual Chaos Report, in 2017 put out there that only 36% of major IT projects will succeed, 19% will be abject failures, and the rest will be challenged. The Institute of Information Technology has put out there that the main reason for failure is people. The statement of requirements is never clear, it's never agreed. People go jumping in without working out what they're trying to solve and why, and then they have to deal with the mess. That's the core reason why things don't work. So you have to think, if you were to take your total cost of all of your IT projects and you were to apply a failure rate of 19% for the Standish Group statistics, how much would that cost? What if you could make that 5%, 9%, whatever? That would make a massive difference to the CEO, CFO, and overall confidence in an organization. Now, to make that happen, we've got to look at perception. So how people see a problem tends to dictate how they see a solution. Now, we're going to share a few things about what we see in the market with cloud and AWS, but this one's very easy. It's like those organizations that have a business plan and can communicate together as teams get really good results, and those that can't don't. And we'll go into that a little bit more detail. And lastly, the third area is what I like to call the Siamese twin of cloud adoption, or you could call it, I don't know, the crazy uncle in the attic. I don't know what you call it. But the fact is, you don't move into a new house until you have exited the liabilities of your old one. Similarly, with cloud adoption at scale, you're very unlikely to move all into cloud really quickly and keep hold of your data center estate and other IT assets. There has to be an exit. And we very fortunately have an AWS partner, Cushman & Wakefield, who are specialists in data center advisory, and they are here to talk about what options are available and how you might want to view the exit of legacy as you move into cloud and the possibilities that it presents. Now, with each of these three areas, there will be a message. And if you forget everything else that I say today, I would be grateful if you remember the three messages. So, the first message, how you think is what you will get. If you think about a problem in a certain way, you have created a system. That system will have influences, it will have cause and effect relationships that determine an outcome. Quite often we see the kind of thinking that constrains success is around biases, cognitive biases, things like, well, you know, I've got a great CV, nothing can fail, it's all going to go well, we're doing it. Or representative bias. Cloud is just like traditional IT. It's about cost reduction. We need to manage this in the same way. Doesn't work like that. So we need to understand how we're thinking about IT in general before we start looking at cloud. So, to go into a little bit more detail, I've got for you a lovely example of how people think about a problem and the impact that has on their solution. Here it is. So, in the Apollo missions from 67 to 72, the astronaut Alan Shepard said, "It's a very sobering feeling to be up in space and realize that one's safety factor was determined by the lowest bidder on a government contract." NASA, finance, wants to build a cheap rocket, taxpayers' money. Astronauts want a safe rocket. They are both right. The problem is they lacked an effective mechanism through which they could manage trade-offs and come up with a solution to the problems. And obviously, they incurred a lot more cost and risk, as evidenced by Apollo 13 incident. So when we're looking at cloud in a similar kind of vein of how do we look at this as a problem to be solved, I like to put this on the board, and if this is useful to you, please do. At one end, you have a big on-premise IT footprint and small cloud, and we're talking about platform here. And at the other end, big cloud footprint, small on-premise IT. Now, the question is, why on earth would you want to incur the pain and hassle of moving along this line? Why would you change anything in IT? Well, you're going to make changes because the value and cost of the future state is better than the status quo. Or it might just be that the status quo is unsustainable. So in a disrupted market, competitors are coming up with innovative ways to improve service, reduce price, come up with a way of attracting customers faster and better than their competition. So if you're in a disrupted market, you're going to have to make significant changes and probably make that move to the right. If you're not in a disrupted market, maybe you don't. All are different. So what I think is interesting about cloud is not the price of servers versus instances or whatever else we want to measure. It's the actual big picture end result. Have a think about the type of companies that have adopted cloud in a big way and the impact they've had on their markets. I'll start with Amazon. Last time I looked, Amazon had a market capitalization of $778 billion. Walmart, $253 billion. Still pretty big, but they've been around a lot longer. Similarly, if I look at Airbnb, they're privately owned, but the estimated market capitalization, $31 billion. If I look at Hilton worldwide, the established, very reputable organization that's been doing this for ages with hotels, they're on $25 billion. And then we have the other one, the really famous one, Netflix. They have a market capitalization of $142 billion. Now, we know Blockbuster isn't there anymore. So these disruptive organizations tend to adopt cloud, and they tend to have very high valuations compared to those which are perhaps slower to move up that scale. So we have to ask, if our industry is being disrupted, where are we today? Where do we plan to be in 3 years' time? And taking into account the level of disruption, the competition, and the customer expectations, where do we actually need to be? Might put it another way. If somebody came to you and said, here is $20 million, I want you to set up a competitor to your current employer, and I want you to be in the market trading within 9 months to a year. What are you going to do? Are you going to go out to tender, buy lots of IT, get data center space, go through procurement cycles, get your insurance policies in place, hire the right people. Are you going to do all that? Or are you just going to do what Airbnb, Netflix, and Amazon do, which is go on cloud? You're probably going to do the latter. So the journey depends on the disruption. Now, there's a very interesting stat from the Standish group again on what is it that drives success in these big projects versus failure. And the thing which Standish group have come up with is this view that it's quite obvious your success is dependent on your speed of decision making and how simple you make it to get things done. So their analysis shows that if you have a simple, very much agile way of working on projects, you will have a very low failure rate and a very high success rate. And if you have a far more complicated, far more waterfall kind of approach to developing, then you're going to have a lot more failures and it will cost you a lot more money. So there is a lot of value, financial and otherwise, in keeping things simple and looking at the speed at which you're able to make decisions. For the past 2 months, I've done 1-hour conference calls with a large global brand where there are a load of people in the room. Maybe you have cultures like this yourselves. A load of people in the room on the call. Most of them don't need to be there. We go through this process week after week, and the analysis shows that if they were to go to cloud, they'd be saving around $9 million a week. So their speed of decision making is dictating their ability to get things done. That's not their fault, that's an organizational constraint. That is preventing their organization from responding to disruption. And they're going to have failure rates. The agile approach works. Now, we have to think why that is the case. Going back again to Standish Group, but this time including aeroplanes and water. Standish refer to decision latency. And they're saying that the speed with which you can make a decision on a project is as valuable as the decision that you're actually making. If you can't make decisions in the speed required, your project kind of fails. If you can do things iteratively and learn, have some good ones, have some bad ones, you get the better result. So again, we have to ask, if you have constraints in the speed at which you make decisions and you have a large budget for IT projects, what would 32% of that budget look like? If you could reduce losing that 32% and get it down to 9%, what would that be worth? Not just in terms of risk, but also in terms of the actual cost. Now, the reason why I have the glass of water there is the key concept with decision latency is entropy. Second law of thermodynamics. Energy dissipates towards equilibrium. If you can inject some oomph to a system, a closed system, then you create more opportunities. You create far more potential scenarios that can come out of that. So in the Korean War, those two aeroplanes were fighting each other frequently. It's the American F-86 Sabre and the Russian-made MiG-15. They are technically about the same, and the Americans shot down 10 times more of the Russian-made planes. Question was why, and a US colonel worked out that the American-made plane had an uninterrupted field of vision, so the pilot could get data. Data-driven decisions, we hear a lot. Pilot could get data. The Russian-made plane had a lot of framework, metal, between the pilot and the outside world. So with the American pilot, he was able to observe and then orientate, analyze what that says, make a decision quickly, high stakes, act, and repeat. Now, if you're doing that, then you're disrupting. You're adding the increase to entropy. You're adding that extra oomph to a closed system that changes things. If you're not, then it's your competitor that's doing it. So this is no different from what the military do, and they call it the OODA loop. What we're talking about here is information entropy, that if you add useful information, you're likely to increase the range of options that people see in front of them, and hence help them get a better one. And that's why the business case side of this is so important. So as well as looking at the speed of decision making and the ability to be decisive in itself, we've also got to think, what other factors add to cost and risk in cloud adoption, and for that matter, other IT projects? Well, I've taken this from the Project Management Institute. This could be the same list from JP Kota or any of these other change management gurus. And it all comes down to getting a baseline of can you do things or not. So in 2016, we had at reInvent, our big summit in Las Vegas, Fabio Veranosi from Enel go up on stage and say cloud adoption is not a technology decision, it's a business decision. And he managed to get his business sponsors intimately involved, tracking KPIs, aligning IT to the business. They worked in a very agile way, and they worked on the basis of we need to do things, not we have to do things because they're important because we didn't think about it earlier. They planned ahead. And this whole way of working that pulls people together is absolutely nothing new. It's, as I say, it's Project Management 101. And I would say it comes down to this as a question. And if any of your organizations are either adopting cloud, thinking about it, helping others, if you put the decision team in a room at 11:30 in the morning and you ask them all to decide where they're going to go for lunch and how they're going to get there by noon, could they do it? That's what this is really asking. Now, in AWS, we've put together a little tool which you can have access to. It's free of charge, and it will help you to baseline how ready, willing, and able your organization is to implement a major change program. We're not saying whether you're good or bad. We're saying how challenging is this going to be? Because we don't want IT put on the spot for delivering everything quickly on the basis that it's simple when the leadership needs to get behind IT, provide the right resource, and provide the sponsorship. So we need to communicate. This will take about 5 minutes to complete. It's a load of yes-no questions, 20 in fact. It will give you a score, and it will give you advice in a report. If anyone would like to go through this, please talk to your AWS account manager or myself afterwards, and we'll do it. You might find it really helpful in communicating to your peers and your management why cloud needs to be handled in a more planned way. Now, the picture here is illustrative. What I actually see when I average out the results I get from customers is very interesting. I see that leadership is kind of in the middle, business case is low, and consensus is, again, towards the center. What I believe is happening is that leadership knows that cloud adoption is happening. There was actually a study by FSN Group that found that 68% of CFOs believe that cloud adoption, or at least hybrid, which is a slower journey, is inevitable. I always find that interesting because that means that 32% of CFOs still live in the 1950s. There you go. But what I think you'll find useful with this is it will help get a picture of where you are today. We see that the leadership know it's happening. Leadership minus 1 or 2 in the hierarchy has risk issues, personal and business, all of which need to be taken very, very seriously. And that means that they're not getting together on a business case. Because there's no actionable information available in a digestible way like a business case, people aren't accountable. Decisions in conflict and in competition with each other, which might be perceived as more important than cloud, take precedence. Nothing happens, and we end up with decision inertia. And that's what we're trying to get beyond. We're trying to get people as teams to the point where they can execute and get a good result. So we've done about 300 plus business cases as AWS worldwide. And when we go into our company Salesforce system, which we use, and we look at the speed in which a deal happens, we find that the customers that we've supported with a business case will go to adopt cloud and use the services 60% faster than those who don't. It's all about communication. So if you want to make it easy with the project, you've got to help other people understand why they need to support it. When you look at a business case, a lot of people will jump straight into, now how do we do it and what are the numbers? I'm going to say to you it's far more helpful, especially to someone in finance who might not like talking to people in IT, might talk a completely different language, in fact. It might be useful to them to give them more of a breakdown. So when we look at the business case, my suggestion will be try to answer it in terms of 4 questions. Now, the first 2, why do I need to change? Well, that could be current state is not sustainable, more value in change. What are my options? That frames the decision. What is the decision you need to take? When we move to what and when being, we're going to do some analysis and we're going to come up with a picture of what these options represent in terms of risk and benefits. Well, that's the investment case. When and how, well, this is execution. This is the project planning. If you put it all together, you will confuse yourselves, let alone everybody else. If you separate it, it's far easier for the right people to take on board the right messages. So that's the stage of what you think. How you think determines what you get. The next message is how you act determines what you get. How people act illustrates how they think. Now, you, I'm sure, are all either IT suppliers or you're IT customers. So I'm going to put something a little bit contentious out to you. I bet that you find that when you talk to any IT supplier, they have a maturity model, nice linear maturity model, all based around kind of Darwinian evolution. Right? You start at this end, and over time, you progress and you become great. The problem with that is, every time you talk to one of these IT suppliers, where do they put you on their maturity scale? Where is it? It's always at the ape stage, isn't it? Nearly always. You're always at that point where it's like, well, we are not at the right level. And if the supplier sees you as immature, they're going to behave towards you as if you are needing education, and that might not be the best approach. What I think is interesting is if we look at the real experts in customer relationship management, I use Marketo, I think they're very good, they say that that whole sequential lifestyle model to help plan and budget our activities no longer applies. Our marketing needs to become more personalized. Now, think back to the model that AWS is providing to you that helps you tell us what you need and why, and gives you a report that helps you tell other people so that you can come together as teams. It's about being personalized in the approach. And the interesting thing about Marketo is they're saying you might not have a relationship that's based on a technology roadmap. It might be somebody advocates something they've heard about, they later purchase it, they then change to another supplier, and over time they're educated. It's very iterative and agile as a relationship. It's far more fluid. And if we as IT suppliers, taking AWS as an example, try to view our customers in a far more personalized way, we're going to be far better prepared to field the right solutions to actual problems. So don't let them play spot the monkey with you. Now, if we go and have a look at the common thing around cloud which comes up, which is TCO, it's a little bit of a distraction. And I'm going to give you a view of TCO. TCO can be very emotive, in fact. That's fine. It's a great discussion to have. But here's an illustration of how it could work and the conversation that you can have around it. So let's start with, right, AWS in orange is 10 times more expensive than building on-premise because the only things we're looking at are buying a load of boxes and turning cloud on demand, 24/7, lights on, nobody home, right? But it doesn't work like that. You do have an IT team. TCO is about how you build up the picture and what you include. So let's add in the IT team. Lines have gone up. Now we also need to think about insurance. There's an asset, disaster recovery, catastrophic risk. There will be inflation on people, power, projects planning, support and maintenance. Line's going to go up again. And then we've got another lump of applications and servers that support applications and servers that support the business. If you talk to any of the AWS technology evangelists, they've worked in organizations that have moved into cloud, and one of them said to me that the really interesting thing he found when he did a discovery on his IT estate as a CIO was about 30% was just supporting the things that support the business. You move to cloud, that goes away. Another part, not included on this, is the applications that you can retire because no one's made a decision to cut them out. So let's now add on a few more things. We've put on decommissioning. You can't just throw it away. You've got to get rid of it. That costs money. We've got capacity planning headroom. You don't build to peak. You build to peak plus a risk management headroom because that manages risk of spikes. You have to do it with on-premise. And if we click, that's going to go up. Next one I'm going to put on is internal rate of return of 10%. You're committing more money up front in year one with on-premise. And the next one I'm going to click is cloud utilization. The point with cloud is you pay for what you actually use, not what you're planning ahead and thinking you might use, so you have to build more. So if we actually apply a utilization of 40%, which is pretty generous to be honest, we get a tipping point. And now on-premise is more expensive. But this is still on demand. What if we add a few migration costs for AWS, which depending on complexity could be high or low, it's illustrative. And what if we now put in a view of Moore's law? Now, Moore's law it's a bit contentious, but I think you can say that the power and size of the instances that we have today are hugely greater for much less money than they are a while back. I know this is contentious, but here's a view of it. You work it out for yourselves. Now, the other thing is reserved instances. If you commit and do a trade-off, you might tell us, we need these, they're going to be on all the time, and we'll give you a discount of up to 75%. You might use our spot service, where you utilize our unused capacity around the world, and you might get a 90% cost reduction. If you went to Lambda, it would be a flat line almost. So the way in which the TCO is done very much has to reflect inputs and assumptions, and there's an illustrative view. Love to work with you on your own situation. So as a summary on cost, include everything, but give a thought, please, to innovation. So there's a lot of things that our customers tell us that they could not do on-premise, but they can do in cloud. Again, back to the Enel example, he was releasing an IoT solution, which he couldn't do within cloud. McDonald's said they could not have released a point-of-sales solution around APAC other than by using cloud. So that covers the cost side. Let's move to risk. When customers talk to me about cloud adoption and risk, they are usually referring to these things. And the security one's quite interesting. Gartner say that through 2020, public cloud infrastructure as a service workloads will suffer at least 60% fewer security incidents than those in traditional data centers, and that 95% of the security failures will be the customer, not the cloud service provider. And that's in clouds are secure, are you using them securely? That refers back to our shared responsibility model. The only one here which is universally bad is the gap between book value and market value, which Mark from Cushman & Wakefield will talk about. So you might have a data center or a data center estates on your books that you paid 30 million for. You're depreciating it nicely over 20 plus years, but in the meantime, the actual market value of that asset has nosedived and is now at 3 million. That is now looking like an auditor issue because your books aren't reflecting reality. That is a serious one. So anything about TCO or whatever pales in insignificance compared to that. We also very often find that cloud is called a productivity play, first and foremost. And I think that's absolutely right. And I'm going to give you a few cases which I got from IDC. You might think of some KPIs you would want to track, and we can certainly give you some suggestions in these sort of headers. But taking an IDC report from February this year, they looked at 27 AWS customers worldwide. They found that group had on average achieved a 51% reduction in their total cost of operations. Developer productivity was up an average of 25%, and they had 94% less unplanned downtime. So cloud has a lot more impact than just the bare basic costs. So the last message of these three is what you inspect is what you get. So you think about it, determines your actions. Well, let's now inspect what those actions are giving us. And I've got another great example, I think, from the space programs. So I hope you do remember the ill-fated Mars orbiter of 1999. It crashed into the planet. It crashed into the planet because some people on the team were doing their measurements in kilometers per hour, others were doing it in miles per hour. Nobody checked. Nobody inspected. So to make sure that you don't have this sort of crashing into a planet experience, we recommend that you have a structure and a framework to govern your business planning, and that you communicate this within your organization so that you don't just jump into how to do it. So we start off with, what is the problem we're trying to solve? What is the risk appetite of the organization we're in? And is this something which is okay? If it is, now we know what we're going to analyze and why. So we go into value analysis, cloud economics, and the cost of migration. And if we've done that, now we can actually make an information-driven decision and track the benefits. Pretty obvious, isn't it? It's just the OODA loop, nothing more. Military have been doing this for years. So it's all about systems. A systems-based approach is what we recommend that you have for cloud. Stop seeing it in terms of linear progressions and maturity models. Think about your system. Are you adding that oomph of additional entropy to your system, or are you letting energy dissipate within a process that's too complicated to get anything done? So if I look at cloud adoption, I can see three big decisions. How do I need to use IT, mainly to serve customers? What kind of IT platform do I need? And how do I get out of the legacy stuff? There are uncertainties which will have a cause and effect relationship, as with outcomes. And I could put this together as a diagram where you can see how they all interrelate. So, in summary, measure impact. Now, on top of these KPI, on top of these three financial, operational, quality and risk management objectives, there is the big one, valuation. In public sector, it's governance. Commercial, valuation. What are the KPIs that could actually be tracked around cloud adoption to show how you're doing? Well, these are things taken from our public website. You can't read them. Please get the PDF from the after show. But there are a lot of things you can track, as our other customers do. And then the next thing is, on cloud adoption, optimize, optimize, and then optimize again. Make it a continuous improvement process. So, one, your pricing trade-offs. How much commitment for how much discount? Here is a live example of an anonymous customer that has just reserved instances. Also, you can tag assets in cloud and see who's using them, how much and why. Put in triggers and reporting. CloudWatch is a good example. And actually automate how you're using cloud and controlling costs. And lastly, you're going to have to make some big decisions if you're going to avoid double running costs and achieve savings. One of those could be, our process is too complicated, our organization isn't enabling things to happen, we have to change that. And the other would be, how much of our legacy assets are we getting out of, and at what rate? And what apps are we going to retire? And if you can do these things, you're probably reducing your cost and risk remarkably. And at this point, I'd like to hand over to Mark Trevor from Cushman & Wakefield to talk about how we go about the exit of legacy assets.
Which one is it?
Green is forward, red is back.
Next. Yeah. Yeah, hi, I'm Mark Trevor from Cushman & Wakefield. I run the data center advisory team across EMEA. What our clients get faced a lot, and most businesses face, is underutilization of the data center. And that is, the cause of that may be, as John mentioned earlier, it may be the headroom was too great when the data center was first built, or indeed there's been a cloud migration of some sort. This is a typical situation that we come across, where our client has a strategy which is around a cloud migration. What do they do with their existing data center? Significant underutilization. There's no linear decrease in the operational costs of the data center. There's continued capital investment. You know, the solution is either to move out or remain in the data center. Obviously, the key concerns about a move out of the data center in relation to legacy asset is issues around cost and risk on migration. And one of the big factors that we never really appreciated until about a year or two ago was the net book value of those assets. You know, we've come across clients who have net book values up to 70 million. They get a formal valuation according to the RICS, which is based on comparable evidence, and it comes out to the base asset value. So in that instance, the actual base asset value was about £8 million. So from their perspective, it was they couldn't actually move, and they were running a data center at ridiculously high cost. Our view is that you should actually integrate really your data center real estate strategy within your IT strategy. Often the IT strategy is done and then they work out actually the real estate issue is a big problem. Those are typical targets that our clients often look around their real estate. So we think it's around, that's the focus of it. In terms of a process, you know, they need to work out what their current TCO, both in expected TCO going forward. They then need to create a number of different options that could actually meet those objectives. And some of those may be completely, meet nothing. But actually, the actual sale and leaseback of required capacity, we found, tends to be often the actual optimum solution. I think one of the key areas is trying to establish what the data center is worth. And like I said, if you did an RICS red book valuation based on comparables, it's a leased asset, it's probably worth zero. It may actually be worth nothing. Negative value because of how you have to reinstate the asset. From a freehold perspective, it may be that there is some value in terms of the underlying real estate. What we've developed is we've looked at what the business opportunity is to actually from using those assets, and that really supports the net book value recovery. And you know, our clients have been pleasantly surprised in terms of when we've gone through this process and we've actually gone out to talk to a number of parties to bring them in to run the data center with this reduced utilization so they can actually fill that, create revenues. They've been pleasantly surprised in terms of the outcome. So what we do is we run IRRs based on those modeling, and we've looked at conservative, possible, and optimistic. And the outcome actually has been quite significant. So this one, actually, the real estate value on this was zero, but actually from a retail perspective, we were coming out with numbers close to 18, 19 million. I think the final thing really is through RAG analysis. What we do is we follow down hitting those different objectives, having carried out various different steps. And like I said, in most instances, the sale and lease back of the actual required space, which you can time over a period of 2, 3, 4, 5 years as you move out and you move into cloud in its entirety. It's actually very interesting for the operators to come in. They have a revenue stream and they immediately have a business case as to why they might pursue that. So actually moving out of the data center is actually the wrong thing if you don't have to. When do you do that? It's about tipping points. John talked about tipping points. We look at tipping points. This was based off I think in this instance, the utilization was around 33%. They had to be, well up the scale in terms of actually when the data center was costing more to run than it would be to pursue an alternative option. That's me.
So, thank you. So, thank you very much for attending this session. Core message really is AWS can help you get into cloud, optimize cloud, and also exit that legacy debt that might be holding you back. And the way in which you make decisions is going to influence the speed and success rate that you have. And if you'd like to start with a baseline view of how your organization makes decisions and could successfully execute so that you've got something you could use, please do contact me directly, talk to your AWS account manager, or let us know in some way how we can help. Thank you very much.